we've got some really interesting stuff to dive into today. You sent over information about the Modernizing Access to Our Public Waters Act of 2025.
Right.
Bit of a mouthful, so they're also calling it the MAPWaters Act of 2025.
Yeah, MAPWaters. Makes sense.
And you've given us the actual source material here, these excerpts from Congressional Bill H.R.187.
That's right. Straight from the source.
So our mission today, it seems pretty clear. Let's unpack what this act is really trying to do, specifically when it comes to, making it easier for people to access federal waterways and understand the fishing rules.
Exactly. This deep dive is really about cutting through that legislative language, getting to the core of what MAPWaters is all about. It's tackling a pretty fundamental issue, actually. How do we get clear, consistent information out to the public about how they can, enjoy our federal waterways?
Especially for recreation and fishing.
Precisely. And the Act's strategy, its main approach is standardization, consolidation, and then publishing all that essential data.
Okay, standardizing, consolidating, and publishing. Those sound like the key verbs here, the engines driving this thing.
Definitely.
But who exactly are we talking about? Which agencies? The bill kicks off with some specific definitions, I see.
It does, and those definitions are, well, they're pretty crucial for understanding the scope, the reach of the Act.
Right.
So when you see federal fishing restriction, that means any defined area where fishing is limited or maybe totally off limits, temporarily or permanently.
And that's by a specific agency?
By a federal land or water management agency, yes. And the Act lists them out very clearly.
Okay, who's on the list?
It's the Bureau of Reclamation, National Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service.
Ah, okay. So the big players, the folks actually managing these lands and waters day to day.
Exactly, the ones on the ground.
Got it. And what about the term federal waterway itself? What does that cover under this act?
That's a really key point. A federal waterway is defined as any waters managed by one or more of the secretaries.
Okay, and secretaries means?
In this context, it refers to two specific roles. The Secretary of Agriculture, but acting through the Chief of the Forest Service.
Right, because the Forest Service is under agriculture.
Precisely. And the Secretary of the Interior. So it's primarily focused on waterways under their combined jurisdiction.
Okay, that clarifies the scope. And one more definition check, the Act uses the term state. That's broader than just the 50 states, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The definition of state here is quite broad. It includes all 50 states, naturally, but also the District of Columbia and all the U.S. territories and possessions.
Wow. Okay, so the reach is pretty wide geographically.
Definitely.
All right, so we've got a good handle on the who and the what. Let's dive into that first big action, standardization. Section 3, Interagency Data Standardization. What's the main idea there?
Well, what's really interesting here, I think, is the push to get all these different federal agencies, basically speaking the same language when it comes to data.
On the same wavelength, so to speak.
Exactly. Within 30 months after the Act becomes law, the Secretaries Interior and Agriculture, they have to work together.
To do what?
To create and adopt common standards for their databases. The whole point is to make sure they're geospatial data.
Geospatial meaning location-based data, right, tied to a map.
Precisely. Data on things like recreational access points or fishing restriction boundaries.
Yeah.
That data needs to be compatible.
Yeah.
And not just compatible, but interoperable.
Interoperable, meaning they can actually work together seamlessly.
Yeah, think of it like different software programs, being able to share information without any glitches. That's the goal.
So instead of, say, the Park Service having one system for boat launches and the BLM having a totally different one that can't talk to it.
Right.
About something as basic as a closure, they'll actually be using compatible systems.
Right.
That sounds, well, fundamental.
It really is. And they're not doing it in a vacuum. They're required to coordinate with the Federal Geographic Data Committee.
Okay, and that committee already exists.
It does. Its whole purpose is to promote consistent geospatial data practices across the federal government. So the Act is, wisely leveraging that existing structure and expertise.
Smart. Avoids reinventing the wheel and hopefully prevents just a confusing mess of different data formats.
That's the intention, yeah.
Okay, makes perfect sense. So, step 1, get the data standardized. Step 2 must be getting it out to us, the public, right?
Exactly.
That brings us to section 4, data consolidation and publication. Sounds like the goal is putting this stuff online.
Absolutely. This is where it gets practical for the end user. Within 5 years of the Act passing, The secretaries have to digitize and make a whole load of information publicly available online.
In what format?
Using Geographic Information System data, GIS data. So map-based searchable information. Let's break down what they need to publish, starting with subsection A, federal waterway restrictions.
Okay, restrictions. What kinds of restrictions are we talking about here?
It's pretty comprehensive. It starts with the basics, like the status is a waterway open or closed to entry, open or closed to watercraft.
Right, the fundamentals.
But then it gets much more detailed. It includes things like requirements for watercraft inspection and decontamination, for invasive species.
Important stuff.
Definitely. Also, restrictions on low-flying aircraft near waterways, or rules about diving, things maybe you wouldn't immediately think of but are crucial for safety or protecting the environment.
Yeah, those details matter for using these areas responsibly.
Exactly. It also covers seasonal closures. Lots of places have those for, say, wildlife nesting or migration.
Makes sense.
Then it gets into rules that directly impact boaters. Like, are there limits on motorized propulsion, horsepower restrictions, even what kind of fuel you could use in certain sensitive areas?
Okay, so if I'm planning a boating trip, theoretically, I could find all of that specific info in one spot online.
That's the vision, yes. One reliable, standardized source.
What else falls under restrictions?
It keeps going. Things like where you can or can't anchor your boat, no wink zones, which are common, exclusion zones, maybe around dams or sensitive habitats, danger areas, and any limits on vessel speed.
Basically all the rules of the road, or rules of the water, I guess.
You got it. Anything governing how you can navigate on a federal waterway. And it even lists restrictions on the direction of travel, like maybe only upstream or downstream is allowed in certain sections.
Wow. Good
And it
stuff.
doesn't stop there. Subsection 6 gets really specific about listing restricted uses.
Okay, like what kinds of uses?
This is where it gets really interesting for pretty much anyone who enjoys being on or near the water. The list includes canoes, paddlecraft kayaks, paddleboards, rafts, drift boats.
So non-motorized stuff.
Yes, but also motorboats, personal watercraft like jet skis, airboats, even amphibious aircraft and hovercraft.
Hovercraft. Okay, that's specific.
It is. And it even covers over snow vehicles or other motorized vehicles when they're on frozen waters. And ocean-going ships were applicable.
Huh. And swimming too.
Swimming is explicitly mentioned, yeah. And it leaves room to add other relevant recreational activities if needed. That level of detail could be, well, incredibly helpful for planning.
Absolutely. Just knowing if your kayak is even allowed in a certain stretch of river, for example, that's huge.
Exactly.
Now, subsection B moves on to federal waterway access and navigation information. What's covered there?
This part is all about the practicalities. How do you actually get to the water? What facilities are there?
Like boat ramps.
Precisely. It mandates digitizing and publishing the locations of all boat ramps, portages, where you carry your boat, between waterways and fishing access sites under federal authority.
Okay, location is key. What else?
Crucially, it also requires them to provide the open and close dates or seasons for these facilities and sites.
Ah, that's a big one. Knowing if the ramp you plan to use is actually open when you get there, that avoids a lot of frustration.
Huge potential time saver, right? No more guessing or relying on outdated forum posts.
Definitely a potential game changer for planning trips.
Yeah. And one more thing in this section. If it's feasible, they also have to include bathymetric information and depth charts.
Underwater maps, essentially.
Exactly. That kind of data is really important for safe navigation, especially in bigger lakes or coastal areas or places you've never been before.
Makes sense. Now, given the name MAPWaters Act, fishing info has got to be a major component. Subsection C covers federal fishing restrictions. What data can anglers expect?
This section is aimed squarely at providing a clear picture of where and how you can legally fish on these federal waters.
So what details are included?
It requires publishing the exact location and boundaries for all recreational and commercial fishing restrictions.
Okay.
That includes areas that are fully closed, partially closed, any no-take zones, and also any fishing restrictions that apply within or around marine protected areas.
So hopefully no more accidentally fishing in a closed zone because the boundaries weren't clear.
That's the goal. Reducing that kind of ambiguity would be a massive benefit for anglers.
I can see that.
Right.
What else?
It also requires detailing any restrictions on specific types of fishing gear or bait. You know how those rules can vary a lot depending on the water body or the species you're targeting?
Yeah, different rules everywhere.
Exactly. And finally, it includes making clear all federal requirements related to catch and release fishing.
So basically, everything you need to know to fish legally and, responsibly on federal waterways should eventually be easily findable online.
That's the plan. And I see something else here in subsection D. There's a way for the public to give feedback.
Ah, public comment. That seems important for keeping it accurate.
It really is. It requires the secretaries to set up a process for the public to submit questions or comments about the data they're publishing on access and restrictions.
So people can point out errors?
Yeah, or maybe suggest improvements. That kind of feedback loop is, well, potentially really valuable for making sure the information stays accurate and useful over time.
You could imagine people flagging like, hey, this boat ramp status is wrong, or this closure date is outdated.
Exactly. That user feedback could be crucial.
And how often does this data need to be refreshed? It's not much good if it's 6 months out of date.
Good question. The Act actually sets specific update frequencies. For the general waterway access and restrictions data, that's subsections A and B, the target is updating at least twice a year to the maximum extent practicable.
Okay, twice a year. And for fishing rules?
For fishing restrictions, which can change much faster, with emergency closures or regulation changes,
right.
The requirement is for updates in real time as those changes take effect.
Whoa, real-time updates for fishing regs. That could save so many anglers a wasted trip or a ticket.
It's a pretty ambitious goal, but yeah, that would be a huge step forward if they can achieve it.
Definitely. Now, I did notice a couple of things that are specifically excluded from this data publication requirement. What are those?
Right, subsection F makes it clear. The requirements of this section don't apply to irrigation canals and flowage easements. Well, those often have very specific, different management structures and purposes.
Yeah.
Often tied to water delivery contracts and things like that. So they're carved out.
Okay. And there was something else excluded.
Yes, subsection G includes a really important protection. It states what information won't be disclosed.
And what's that?
It clarifies that while they're publishing all this location-based data, they cannot reveal sensitive details about the nature, location, character, or ownership of historic, paleontological, or archaeological resources.
Ah, okay. To protect those sites.
Exactly. It aligns with existing laws designed to prevent looting or damage to irreplaceable cultural or scientific sites. You want people to access waterways, not inadvertently lead them to fragile heritage sites.
That makes complete sense. Okay, moving on. Section 5 of the Act talks about cooperation and coordination. This sounds like they know they can't do it all alone.
Absolutely. This section basically acknowledges this is a heavy lift and actively encourages partnerships.
Who can they partner with?
The secretaries are specifically authorized to coordinate and team up with non-federal groups. That includes state natural resource agencies, tribal natural resource agencies.
Okay, so working with states and tribes.
Yes. And also with the private sector and nonprofit organizations. Think technology companies, geospatial data specialists, maybe data science experts.
So leveraging outside expertise and resources seems key.
Definitely. They can even enter into formal agreements, like contracts or cooperative agreements, with these third parties to help get the work done.
Interesting. Any specific agencies mentioned for collaboration?
Yes. Subsection B specifically highlights the potential for working closely with the United States Geological Survey, the USGS.
Ah, the USGS. They handle a lot of mapping and data, right?
Exactly. They have deep expertise in data collection, bringing data together, aggregation, digitizing it, standardizing it, and publishing it. So collaborating with USGS seems like a very logical move for implementing this act.
Makes sense to tap into that existing federal expertise. Now, I see subsection C mentions a requirement regarding compliance with laws.
Yeah, this is critical. It mandates that any data developed and shared under this act must fully comply with all relevant federal, state, and tribal laws and regulations.
So it doesn't override existing laws.
Not at all. And they also have to include a clear notice with the data stating that it's subject to these existing legal frameworks. It's about transparency.
Got it. And subsection D seems to be about efficiency, building on existing work.
Precisely. It directs the secretaries to use or incorporate existing relevant data, maps, and resources whenever possible.
So don't reinvent the wheel if good data already exists somewhere else.
Exactly.
Okay.
It specifically mentions building on work done under the Modernizing Access to Our Public Land Act, AMP Land Act, and other relevant laws. The idea is to be efficient and avoid duplicating effort.
Okay, so there's a plan for standardization, collection, publication, and collaboration. But how do we track if this is all actually happening? Section 6 is about reports.
Right, accountability.
Yeah.
The Act builds that in. starting 1 year after it becomes law, and then every year after that through March 30, 2034. The secretaries have to submit detailed progress reports to Congress.
Annual reports detailing what they've achieved.
Yes, outlining the progress made in fulfilling all the requirements of the MAPWaters Act.
And who gets these reports? Which committees are overseeing this?
They go to several key congressional committees. In the House, it's the Natural Resources Committee, Energy and Commerce, and the Agriculture Committee.
Okay, broad oversight there.
And in the Senate, the reports go to the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, and the Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. So, yeah, a significant level of congressional oversight is baked in.
Good to know. Finally, there's Section 7 titled Effect. This section seems focused on clarifying what the Act doesn't do, right?
Exactly. This is really important for setting boundaries and managing expectations. It makes several key clarifications.
Like what?
First, it explicitly says nothing in this Act changes the legal definition of navigable waters under federal law. That definition is complex and has huge implications, so the Act isn't touching it.
Okay, so existing legal definitions stay put.
Correct. Second, it states the Act does not affect the existing jurisdiction or authority of state or federal agencies to regulate those navigable waters.
So it's not shifting power between agencies or levels of government.
No, it's not about changing who is in charge of what. It also clarifies that the Act doesn't modify the authority of federal or state agencies when it comes to managing fisheries. Fishery management rules remain under their existing authorities.
Got it. And what about actual access? Does it change where people can go?
That's probably the most important point for users. It clearly states the Act does not authorize or intend to change the accessibility of waters that were already open for activities like hunting, fishing, or other outdoor recreation before the Act was passed.
So this isn't about opening new areas or closing existing ones.
Correct.
It's purely focused on making the information about existing access and existing restrictions easier to find and understand.
Exactly. It's an information access bill, not a land or water access allocation bill. It's about providing better, clearer, more readily available data about the rules and access points that are already in place.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. If you had to boil it down, what's the core message, the main takeaway from the MAPWaters Act of 2025 for our listeners?
Well, the central goal, really, is to make a significant improvement in public access to information. Vital information about how you can use federal waterways for recreation, for fishing.
And the method is?
Taking all that data, which is often scattered across different agencies, maybe hard to find, sometimes inconsistent, and through this process of standardizing it, consolidating it, and then putting it online in a user-friendly format, making it much, much easier for the public for you to find and understand.
Okay, and thinking specifically about the listener, what are the biggest potential benefits they might see if this act is implemented successfully?
For anyone who enjoys these public waters, it could mean, well, a much smoother planning process, less guesswork.
Right.
You'd hopefully have a much clearer understanding of the actual regulations, boating rules, fishing limits, access point closures, that sort of thing.
So fewer surprises when you get there.
Exactly. Ultimately, it should mean more efficient access to the information you need, which hopefully enhances your whole experience and helps everyone use these amazing public resources more responsibly.
So looking ahead a bit, this involves a huge amount of data across vast areas of federal waterways. Once this information actually becomes standardized and readily available online, what kind of cool tools or, I don't know, innovative applications do you think might pop up? How could this change things?
Oh, that's where it gets really exciting to think about, isn't it? You can imagine all sorts of things, apps, specialized websites.
Like what?
Well, picture interactive maps where you could layer this standardized data. Maybe you filter just for, say, canoe-friendly waters with boat ramps open this weekend. Or you want to see only areas with specific fishing regulations for trout.
Customized maps based on your activity.
Exactly. You might get real-time alerts pushed to your phone about sudden closures due to, I don't know, high water or a temporary fishing restriction in your favorite spot.
That would be handy.
Yeah. This kind of open, standardized data really unlocks potential for developers, private companies, nonprofits, maybe even citizen scientists to create really user-friendly tools. Tools that could genuinely transform how we plan our trips and interact with public waters.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Once you see this kind of effort to consolidate and open up data in one area, you start thinking, what other areas of public information could really benefit from a similar deep dive, a similar push for accessibility and standardization?
Absolutely. It's a model that could potentially be applied much more broadly.